not take the hound off.
Yeah.
Eagle won't mind.
Get a photo of them both together.
Okay, we are live. Good morning. It is Tuesday, May 2nd, 2023. It is 10:30 a.m. and this is a meeting of Senate Natural Resources and Energy to resume our work on the renewable energy standard. And we will pick that back up. My hope is that we'll work on this this week. We have 2 full meeting days, today and tomorrow, and then we're allowed to meet prior to the floor. The floor will be at 10, so I think we'll be able to grab an hour and a half, even 2 hours if we needed to continue some work on this. And with that, in terms of a plan, so we've had conversation going on for, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 weeks, off and on, sitting discussions about the res and planning for the future, without really getting to a conclusion. And given our limited time, I'll just lay out where I think what might be a useful course, and let's figure it out together as a committee. But what I'm thinking is that we have we've learned more and about what the department's already doing. They're delivering a report by year end. We've been looking at a variety of measures, but one of the most important features I think of it was, could we do a study that would put us in a better position next January to re-examine the RES as a whole, including things like in-state generation, associated storage, costs and benefits of that of those assets. And so because the department's already been working and is working on this, it makes sense to me that we would look at what's going on in the department and then look to see if it's covering or not covering the questions that we have. And if it's not, then we might well choose to use our study that we've been talking about, having put out through JFO, address those other questions so that we could have a two complementary sets of questions. If they're well designed, they'll fit together to create a more complete picture for us next January. So that's what I'm thinking could be useful. I don't know if anyone else has another thought on that, but that's how I was trying to make sense of where we're at and the time we have.
Thank you, Chair Bray. So I respect where you're trying to lead us to on this bill. I think the points that will be most relevant to me are, what is the House doing and making sure that this conversation doesn't die, because I do think we need to move the ball forward on this in a tangible way for next session. That I really appreciate the storage language. So if the House is not necessarily attuned to that, I would like us to think through, and I know that Senator Watson had worked with Ledge Council to look at that. And then the last piece is kind of what role do the different departments play as we roll this out. So those are the things that I'm thinking about, but I generally agree with the direction that you're taking us based on our 2 days left.
2 days plus the things that we sign ourselves up for.
Yes.
And we can actually get quite a bit done with those half days. But the point in my mind is to figure out a clear description of what we're aiming for. Senator Watson, anything?
No, I'm just interested in the conversation.
Okay. Well, with that, since Mr. Ford's last visit with the committee, they have worked on their request for proposals, and Mr. Ford shared that with me yesterday, and I thought, okay, we have one of the documents we could use. Mr. Sterling also put together a helpful sort of compare and contrast, a matrix of different features that have been part of our discussions in the last 6 weeks. So I thought, as for rebooting the conversation, we could go through, ask Mr. Porter talk with us about the information in the RFP. That would help us have a clear picture of what's being covered or not. And then from there, we could look at filling in the picture by working with the matrix document that Mr. Sterling put together, as well as our own committee conversations and your bill 140. So we have the whole idea in my mind is to knit things together. Okay, so Mr. Poor, if you could join us at the table and help us. So thanks for pulling materials from together for the committee to look at from your current process. And if you could help us, you know, some about the conversations we've had from being in here for the last month. Maybe we could walk through what you're looking at, and then we could start to look for things that aren't addressed that you also believe might be worth addressing, and perhaps through the JFO contract.
Sure. And what exactly
Yeah, so I'm just gonna say, what
does everybody have here?
Okay. I have it. I want to make sure I'm looking at.
You're welcome.
Okay, thank you.
You want-
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Great. So I have a version of that. Thank you.
It's not a formal document, but since it was, so thanks for sharing a working document of your own, to help us come up to speed on what you're thinking about and what the department's doing.
Right. So for the record, TJ Ford, Director of Planning at the Public Service Department. And as I mentioned a couple of weeks ago when I was in here, the department has been planning as part of its RES review pursuant to the Comprehensive Energy Plan and the Climate Action Plan. When I say RES review, I really mean Renewable Energy Standard and other procurement programs. So to include net metering, standard offer, any community solar, or any type of program we might want to consider. That we have a public engagement process going. And part of our process is also to do technical analysis. We have a requirement already in statute to do a renewable energy standard report every year, and that comes with recommendations. And so we did that. The energy plan was that in 2022, 2023, we did an annual report. And now this year, we're really implementing those steps of we were taking steps to further the public engagement and the technical analysis for setting up options with the goal of having proposed improvements for next session. What we have been doing in the meantime over the past few months on the technical side is starting to develop the scope of work, and it has frankly been informed by some of the conversations that we've had in this committee and on the House side. And what I sent to you, Senator Bray, last night was kind of the working draft that I was hesitant to send it. It may be a little premature because it hasn't seen kind of stakeholders. Stakeholders haven't seen it yet. Our plan is always to share it with the relevant stakeholders to get feedback, to understand kind of if we're on the right track or understand where people might disagree. Not to say we're going to agree on everything that's going to go in the scope, but really to have informed decisions on what goes in the scope. And so that's what you see here. And on the first page here is kind of that cut.
Well, I just, sorry,
Oh, yeah.
I just want to thank you thanks for explaining it's not a done deal on your part. And I know that it's a little awkward to share something that's a work in progress, but given our timing, I really appreciate that you're willing to sort of share it now. And we all know that it has an asterisk on it, but it will certainly help us think as a group better together. So.
Great. So what we see on the first page, which I included in the body of the email that I sent you here, is really the framework of what was in a draft res study that I had sent to you a couple weeks ago, actually. And so that is essentially the substance at a high level of what might be, what would be in the study that we're looking at. And then on the following pages is really the draft of fleshing that out And it also includes an attempt to kind of really start to flesh out how a stakeholder engagement process might work within a scope of work for a contractor. And so, I'll just summarize at a high level. It's got, for consideration of what the climate action plan and the energy plan asks to consider of 100% renewable or 100% clean energy standard. It looks at different scenarios of penetration for or scenarios for tier 2, the distributed energy generation tier in the state. Consideration of a regional requirement for utilities, just a new renewables anywhere in New England requirement. And then within those kind of scenarios, a bunch of different, I'll call them considerations here. Things like the impacts of load management to include storage and how that might affect affect those other scenarios, or the land use impacts, the net impacts on the transmission and distribution grid, whether they're benefits for reducing costs or do they cause costs. I won't read everything on that page, but and so they're attempted to capture everything that was in the energy plan and then informed by the discussions here. As you go through the next pages, you'll see some background on kind of the consideration of what's in the energy plan. And this is really a work in progress draft scope of work that could go into a request for proposals. And then talking about the required analysis with a certain number of scenarios, some of them to be determined by a stakeholder process, and then those considerations kind of fleshed out a little bit more in text. In the timeline portion, later on in the document, there's a provision for stakeholder engagement, and what this is intended to do is model off of what the Climate Council is doing to kind of review input assumptions, scopes, and draft results for analyses being done for the council by Agency of Natural Resources or the department. And so it provides a whole lot of opportunities for stakeholder engagement. I guess I will stop there. I think that's like that high level overview. And see if there's questions, and I could point out one area that I think isn't necessarily covered in this scope of work right now that I'm open to talk about.
Sure. Why don't we do that, and then we'll pause and have a conversation.
Okay.
What was the additional?
Well, so the one area that's not explicit in here, we talk about cost effectiveness and evaluation of the economic impacts from different perspectives, from like a societal perspective, a Vermont perspective, and a ratepayer perspective, but we don't talk about the econometric analysis. That's like the REMI style reports. REMI is a company name. There's another one too, but it's Regional Economic Modeling Incorporated. But those types of reports that get to here's the impacts on gross domestic product for the state. Here's the impacts on jobs for the state. And I do think that's an important consideration. And that's something that potentially could be included here. That's one where previously the JFO was listed as a study partner. They actually have contracted for those types of reports in the past on all kinds of subjects. And that's one where, I guess I would say we don't necessarily have the expertise in-house. We've managed those types of studies. We used to have that expertise in-house, but we don't currently, and so we would contract it out. So I just wanted to point out that that's an important consideration, and that could be incorporated in here or incorporated elsewhere. So for what it's worth.
Bring a couple of them in the name. I'm thinking of, it was just, there was someone at ACCD who recently retired.
Right, Ken Jones.
Thank you.
Yes.
And hadn't the department worked with Ken Jones and ACCD on some economic modeling? I don't know if they use Remy or something else.
We did. He used Grammy. We remember the most recent time that I worked with Ken on something was with weatherization. And we did the economic impacts of weatherization and estimated the job impacts and impacts to gross domestic product of kind of that upfront investment and cost versus kind of long-term savings.
Has someone filled Kevin's role? Ken's role, sorry.
I don't know the answer to that question.
Right, because I knew in past years, we had talked about Remy analyses. I just can't remember where they fit in, if it was part of the CEP or where it was. Okay. So that seems like a good example of whatever complementary analyses that won't come out of the work the contract you're letting down.
Right. Well, it could. We're gonna, like I said, put this, share this with stakeholders,
Right.
and it's a possibility.
All right. Some of the features, I just wanted to go through the list, and then I don't know if it would be helpful then to dive into the document itself. So I'm looking at, let's go down through. In A, we're talking about tier one, whether we're talking clean versus renewable. So there's a big discussion there. I don't know if by clean we mean carbon free. Is that generally how you use the term?
Yeah, thank you for clarifying. We should be very clear about what we think about that, or what we mean by that, because it is carbon free. So in this instance, well, I think it would be up for consideration. What is, as we get to a recommendation, I really think that everything should be on the table. So at this point, at this stage, and so right now, when we have a utility portfolio and it's referred to as clean, it means non-carbon emitting, and it includes nuclear in their portfolio, and it includes the renewable energy credits associated with Hydro-Quebec, large hydro, and so large hydro in Canada, and also large hydro in New England, and some hydro in New York that is imported into New England. And so, so yes, I mean carbon free that is available for delivery in New England.
So I just want to make sure I'm really clear. So clean means it includes nuclear, it includes Hydro-Quebec. Renewable does not include those things?
Right now, renewable would also include Hydro-Quebec. It would not include nuclear.
Right.
Based on current statute definitions. Yeah.
And right, so they both include Hydro-Quebec.
Yes.
Clean includes nuclear, renewable does not. McNeil, where does that fall?
That would fall under renewable.
Not clean.
Renewable, all renewable would fall under clean.
Oh,
So,
okay.
yeah, it would be-
Okay,
yes,
got you. So clean
Yeah.
is like it's a broader umbrella.
right.
So if it's, and so renewable is just like a subset. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that is helpful. Thank you.
And just to make sure I heard that right and keep my notes accurate, McNeil currently is under the renewable umbrella.
Correct.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Okay. And then underneath, so then we look at 20 and 30% on tier two. And then in 3 other scenarios that may be considered by the working group. So is that there? I have heard people float out a concept of something like tier 1A, like a newly defined tranche within the overall power portfolio requirement. Is that the kind of thing you're allowing for in 3?
Yeah, I guess depending on how you define it, it could be 3, or that could be C. A tier 1A of new renewables anywhere in New England. So, when we So when we in the actual draft scope of work, when we listed out, we listed out those first two things, either 100% renewable, 100% clean with 20 or 30% tier 2, and then third is adding a new requirement for utilities to purchase renewable energy from new facilities in New England.
Mr. Ford, where are you in your document?
Let's see, there's not page numbers on here, but in the new pattern in the draft scope of work. So it's the back of the first page of the draft scope of work. So it's the third page of text on this document.
Okay, thank you.
And then there's a numbered list on the bottom there, and those would be scenarios for analysis. And added to that, those scenarios, we put one in there of looking at something that has been alluded to in a discussion item, over the last year. It was called out in the energy plan specifically of considering resources at a more granular basis. So instead of looking at it annually and purchase of RECs annually to meet our requirements, trying to better match that supply and demand, whether it's quarterly or monthly or hourly, but so that it's not, you could now theoretically in 1 hour be 0% renewable and in another hour be 200% renewable, just by your RECs, and that washes out, and in the end you're 100% renewable. And so we want to consider how we can smooth that out and whether that's a good idea. When you balance all the factors of emissions impacts and cost impacts and et cetera.
Just not to go too far into it, can you explain that one a little more? I'm not quite sure what kind of improvement you're foreseeing might be possible by getting to finer levels of analysis of that.
So I think so right now, compliance for the renewable energy standard is on an annual basis.
Yeah.
And it's with renewable energy credits is how you comply. And you can purchase renewable energy credits from any time, like energy generated at any time in the compliance year, or even potentially a previous year, and see and use that to meet the obligation. But as we know, the emissions profile across the year varies, right? In some months, New England's emissions are dirtier than other months. Like there's a different mix of power plants operating. And so instead of using kind of that annual compliance, should we look at a more granular level and say, can we comply quarterly? Can we comply monthly and better match that supply and demand? And I don't know what the answer is there. I don't know, we don't know what the cost impacts are, but this is kind of the first step in exploring that and saying, hey, is this even feasible? Right now, I don't believe the NEPOOL GIS, which is the system that tracks renewable energy credits, I don't think it would be capable of going to an hourly basis without some changes. So then it requires regional changes. Could we kind of look at that and see where we should go? And that, I don't know if that helps.
Sure. So I suppose sort of a worst case scenario, if someone would not have their portfolio in compliance till December 15th, they could acquire the recs necessary, true up for the year, and that would be that, as opposed to actually delivering a portfolio that was compliant all year. Is that the difference that you're thinking about?
Yeah, yes. Yeah, I think that is accurate way to frame it.
Okay, and on this question, something we had talked about in the past, total purchases versus power consumed. If we switched over to total purchases, so we have the full footprint of the power being used, now it's going to be tracked. We made that change. I know it was discussed.
So that's a consideration or a sensitivity for analysis. So what that would do would increase the requirement on utilities. If we only change that one thing right now, our requirement for, as an example, our requirement for tier 2 is 10% in 2032. That's on retail sales. Our total sales are 6% higher than that roughly, because there's distribution losses in there. Our total, I shouldn't have said total sales, that's not accurate. It's our total purchases to meet those sales. So the sales are to the retail customer, and they have to purchase more than that amount in order to deliver that final electricity to the end user. And so, if we change the requirement from retail sales to total sales, one that would be different than all other states in New England, as I understand it, but it would apply the renewable obligation to kind of all the energy that's needed to be purchased to meet Vermont's load. And so there's trade-offs with that, right? It increases the renewable amount of renewable energy that's required to be purchased. It increases the or it changes the profile of the electric utilities portfolio, and then there are costs associated with that as well. And so we want to analyze kind of exactly what that is and determine, how that fits in the context of everything else.
It's certainly of interest to the committee and lots of folks that we're interested in the emissions profile of the power that's being purchased. But in the statutes, does it refer to taking that into consideration? In other words, if we're really trying to be accurate about the greenhouse gas footprint of the portfolio, we need to say what was the total purchase, not just what ended up getting delivered, because as you said, because of line losses, stuff like that.
Right.
But I don't know if when we're in law, if we specify that in considering how to measure, we should be looking at emissions, and that, because if we were, then that would push us towards the sort of the new math that you're talking about.
So in the renewable energy standard right now, the requirement is on retail sales. And so that's very specific requirement. Our greenhouse gas emission from the electric sector in the inventory is now tracked by total sales. So we account for it when we're tracking our emissions. Now that I think I raised this in January in our annual energy report because it was discovered that we had not been tracking it that way for a couple of years. And so that change is made for this year's greenhouse gas inventory. And just wanted to be clear that it makes a very small difference in the overall picture of greenhouse gases in the state, but it is a difference, and we weren't doing it right. We caught the issue and we changed it to do it right.
Okay. And then, but in terms of, in terms of tracking, so that would be that's one of the things you're anticipating setting, not only what you're measuring, but at what intervals you're tracking compliance with the requirements. The monthly versus.
Oh, I see.
annual.
So that would be, we're proposing to study what the impacts of going to a more granular requirement would be.
Okay. I see you have scenario 5 and 6. The TBDs, are there any things in the wings that you can share that we,
Uh,
I'll ask other people the same questions, so it's
Yeah.
not only going to you.
So like I said, we haven't shared the scope yet. It could be
Yeah.
fleshed out beforehand. It could be fleshed out once we have a contractor. I think we welcome in requests for proposals that come to us, if contractors had a proposal for a scenario that they thought would be useful, we'd consider that, but then bring whatever the contractor proposes to a working group, stakeholder group, whatever we want to call it, to kind of flesh out what those would be.
And what's the timeline for you, having those stakeholder conversations and getting a contract out, or an RFP out?
Well, we've kind of tried to been figuring out the best way to do this with the conversation going on. We want to have our own process, but not step on toes either. And but to answer that question, I would like to, share this more specifically with folks this week. And then, in an ideal scenario, we would put out an RFP by the end of next week, because from RFP to contracting with the state, it's probably a minimum of 6 weeks time for the RFP to come back, ask questions, negotiate with the contractor a little bit.
So anything you want to put on a table for those two sort of TBD slots, anything you're thinking of?
Well, some of the considerations that we have could ultimately turn into scenarios.
Okay.
We talk about dealing with a bundled versus unbundled renewable energy credits. We talk about different compliance dates, changing eligibility dates. Some of those, might be easy just to do a sensitivity on each scenario, which would be useful, but some of those may turn into on their own a broader scenario. What if there's we have 100 megawatts of storage that lasts 4 hours? Does that change the equation here for these other scenarios? And so I guess the list of considerations are kind of the initial ideas on what might be other scenarios. And we're open for other ideas.
Okay, I'm guessing you may hear something from the stakeholders.
Yeah, I hope so.
Okay. Now go back to the memo on the top. Keep making sure. So in D, within the scenarios, it's a definition of new facility. How are we defining new at the moment?
So for tier 2, new is considered any resource under 5 megawatts that was built after 2015, June 30th or July 1st, 2015. Can't remember which of those 2 days was the cutoff. But
Is that the only place where we?
one other caveat in tier 2 is that it's got to be connected to the Vermont distribution network.
And so standard offer was all by definition new.
Correct.
And on standard offer, which I think is allocated at the outset, 127.5 megawatts, we've now finished making all those awards. The question is, have they turned into productive plants yet? Right?
So I would have to get back to you with the exact numbers. My recollection is that there's about 80 to 90 megawatts of plants that have been installed from standard offer contracts, and another 30 to 50 that are not yet installed. but all of the solicitations have been completed. And so there should be contracts for all of those plans.
And do we, is there a must be completed by date? Otherwise, those contracts lapse and then you can rebid them, or what will happen? Because sometimes people bid, right? They have a winning bid, but then they decide for whatever reason, they're not gonna actually build that plant. I don't know if they actively like return that allocation to you and say, we're out, go ahead, rebid it, or what happens?
So in the Public Utility Commission process, when they award projects, they have a reserve group that is kind of waiting in the wings in case one of these contracts falls out. That said, what ultimately happens is the contracts don't necessarily fall out until the reserve group has expired. And so then there's a process in place for the commission to then do a new solicitation. Because the solicitation was every year, so the reserve group was kind of on the hook for 9 months. And then if a project fell out, after 10 months, then you just go into the new solicitation.
So currently, how many, you were saying there's somewhere in the neighborhood of 30 to 50 megawatts. They've won a bid, but they haven't built the plant. Is there a date by which they have to deliver, or else that's that, and you retract you say, okay, you've lost that contract, we're gonna go find another bidder.
Yeah, so there's different milestones in the standard offer contract. And so I think that can happen. I can't remember, but 2 years, the interim milestone dates, but within 2 years, they have to build it. If it's not built and they don't have an extension of the contract, then it is retracted.
And does that happen every year, that you end up saying, okay, your shot clock's over, we're retracting and we're redoing it? Is that still part of the department's routine?
Well, this is all the commission's routine. So I'm explaining, just to be clear, this is the Public Utility Commission does the solicitation and contracting. And so yeah, my understanding is that is a regular process that, if milestones are not met, then they take the steps necessary to remove them from the process and then issue another solicitation.
Okay, thank you. Anything else that we should be aware of in terms of assets that might be coming on the line? I mean, there could be private development and PPAs offered, right? I don't know how much of that happens in a year.
Yeah, so it varies by year, and how much happens by year, I think, is pretty well documented in our annual energy report as well. 4 or 5 years ago, there was 50 megawatts. A couple of years that were being installed were closer to 30 megawatts a year now, 30, 35 megawatts per year now that are being installed collectively and that's through standard offer procurement, through net metering, through utility specific purchase power agreements. That does not count the big projects like the Ludlow 20 megawatt projects and some other ones that you have probably heard about that are have been proposed.
I'm just curious, is there a Vermont off-taker for any of the Ludlow power? Or is that all into the grid and sold out?
I don't believe so. I don't believe any of that's staying in Vermont.
Yeah,
contractually.
Right, like milk, we're exporting. All right, Senator White.
Thank you, Chair Bray. So I'm trying to follow along, and I appreciate you going over what exactly the Public Service Department is doing and what the Public Utilities Commission is doing. I think broader, what I'm concerned about as we look at what we want to do as a committee, is if we feel that the needs of the folks who are developing renewable energy and those who would be potentially investing in it in their homes or for their businesses, if they're getting a good relationship formed with the folks who are studying this problem, and that there isn't kind of preconceived expectations of what will come out of the research that you're doing. And I'm wondering if you could help alleviate some of the concern that I have, that there is a already decided or preconceived expectation of what the results will be, that will ultimately continue to not have as much renewable energy be built. That seems like the concern I'm hearing from constituents and developers.
Right. So that's one of the reasons we tried to build in the stakeholder process and to have a working group that would really be engaged in informing assumptions and informing scenarios that we want to see, that could understand the inputs, and we expect all of this to be very public and transparent. In this process, I think just to add a necessity with the state contracts that, the state is the client for a contractor when we hire a contractor. But we're intending to be as open as possible with all of these assumptions. And when it doesn't mean that we would take every recommendation of a stakeholder group. I don't want to kind of promise something that we can't do, right? But we want those recommendations to be, public and have a reason for not taking it. That is,
Yes.
Articulated and understood, and even if not agreed with. And
Okay, and I appreciate that. I think it's interesting that it's already a conversation about things you disagree with the stakeholder group. But I respect where you're coming from, and I do ultimately feel that the direction we're moving as a committee is fair. Do you feel that some of the commentary that has been coming out of, are you open to, and you might not be the right person, it would probably be the commissioner to ask this question, but it feels like some of the trust has been broken. And I think that when we talk about housing, for example, we oftentimes talk about how we have to have a really good setup so that developers feel confident in investing. And what I'm hearing is the continued relationship between the Public Service Department, between the PUC and state government in some ways is actually making renewable energy developers less likely to invest in our state. So I'm wondering if you feel like this process will at all help with that, or what you envision besides the stakeholder engagement? I mean, how do we rebuild that trust so that we're not just studying something to have people feel like they don't want to invest here anyway?
Yeah, I hope that this builds confidence and
Yes.
not undermines confidence. I really, as we do these analyses, they all need to be transparent and public. If we're not at least understanding the assumptions that we're working off of together, then we have no chance of actually connecting. And I think this could be really useful in building that understanding and building that confidence and trust. You're right for calling me on saying presupposing a disagreement here, because maybe there won't be. I mean,
I hope
but I just wanted to be clear that in the case that there was one, that we want to be really responsive and clear on what our position is, so that we can, just understand each other and not talk past each other. There's so much talking past each other that it becomes unproductive. And I'm guilty of that, just like anybody else probably, but I want to try and avoid it.
Thank you.
Very well.
Great, thank you.
Very
Thanks. So this, I have a number of questions. So this document, or the analysis scope of work, this is not finalized yet. So you still have the opportunity to adjust it if you want to, etc. But assuming that it's mostly baked, right? Like it's on its way out pretty soon.
Well, yeah, and just to be clear, there was some conversation back and forth, this initial page here
Yeah.
that we talked with some stakeholders about this, a few weeks ago, and had some back and forth on the substance, felt like we were actually kind of close. And so we fleshed it out here. And then the next step was to kind of say, okay, what does this look like?
Yeah.
And so, but yeah, so we're in that process.
Yeah. Okay, no, that's helpful because I'm, listening to this with the ear of, are there gaps? Are there things that I would like to see that maybe wouldn't be covered? What are the opportunities that might be for some value add, in a legislative bill? And so, I'm intrigued by, as Senator Bray brought up, the scenarios for analysis. I do appreciate that there are these the 5 and 6 that are TBD, but because I think there may be some scenarios that would be of interest to this group that we might want to specify that are not necessarily covered here. But I do have so I just want to just say that generally, but I think I know the answer to a couple of these questions, but I just want to make sure that I'm clear on them. So in the deliverables that you have, which is on the second to last page, number 3. So I am interested that this study is going to result in some recommendations, and it's to maximize, this set of qualities, right? I'm assuming it's easy to read those as they are in a predetermined priority order, if that makes sense. And I'm guessing that the priority order will be determined by the stakeholders, but just want to run that by you.
Yeah, thanks. So one of the things, so the parallel process here is our public engagement process, and we're at the point now where we did some initial kind of information capacity building, and we just this last week on Thursday had a contract signed for our to do some polling, right? So statewide polling followed up by focus groups, and I think the expectation for those focus groups, or the way I think about it, is that the results of that process, which will be done in August, early September at the latest, will help us kind of inform kind of the lens of which we look at these characteristics, right? So that, that public process, it's going to be hard pressed for them for that process to come out with, we need a specific scenario or a specific number, but what we can do is get, okay, this is where we need to place emphasis. Is it on resilience? Is it on reliability? Is it on economic development? Is it on affordability? And how, and then to look at that and have that then come together with this technical analysis to help have that inform kind of the best case scenario. And this one, it's funny you latched on to this one, or that you highlighted this one. I didn't mean a negative connotation.
It's okay.
Because this is something that I don't know if we should have a recommendation out of the technical analysis here, or if that's something for later in the process. But I do see these two processes aligned, where that the public engagement can help us shape the lens at which we look at the actual technical results.
Well, thank you. It's interesting that having recommendations is maybe, it's a question, like, should it be there? Because I appreciate that, having data sort of objectively, right, and say, okay, so but what should we do with it, right? That's interesting. But I'm also interested in number one. You say so. Speaking as a fellow nerd, an Excel-based model used to analyze scenarios, that could be a useful tool moving on into the future. That's great. Of course, all of those scenarios have assumptions built into them, and I'm hoping that the assumptions behind that model will be very explicit, so that if someone disagreed with the assumptions or wanted to modify them, that would be an option.
Yeah, absolutely. And, in the later on the next page, providing key assumptions for review by the PSD and stakeholder group. We have a renewable energy standard model now that we use to estimate the costs of the next 10 years of the renewable energy standard as it is now, compared to not having one. A renewable energy standard. And we do go through a stakeholder process, put it out for assumptions, and that's public. It's just posted. Excel spreadsheet is posted on our website. And so I would expect this workbook to be posted, and as we update it every year, to go through that process as well.
So I think I missed something a little bit there. So you articulate assumptions behind your energy planning. And where are they? If someone wants to.
So every year we do it's called in statute, we did not name it, the consolidated res model. And that is posted on our website. And we update that annually. We report on the results of that in the annual energy report, and an attachment to that report, the renewable energy programs report. And we do put that out for stakeholder comment as well. There's a PowerPoint slides that summarize kind of the key findings or key assumptions and variables that if you change this variable, you're going to change the results a lot, and ask for comments and receive comments on there.
Where on the website is it?
You go.
All these upcoming events that have passed.
They're not coming anymore.
I usually find these on the department's TikTok.
Oh, I haven't seen those.
Operated by my
That's
son.
Wow.
Explains it.
Okay, if you go to publicservice.vermont.gov
Yep.
/renewables,
Yep.
and you, it's actually,
And if this might not be worth our collective time, if we can find a link at another point. So I'll follow up.
I put my little flag on that. So
I actually have it. Indeed.
I bet it's under renewable energy standard.
If I can ask one more
Yeah.
question. Well, and just looking at the storage aspect of this, I just want to call out that it seems, because there are a lot of things that storage can do. There's a lot of problems storage can solve depending on how it's designed. And so it looks like here you're specifically citing the impacts of load management that battery storage might. This is on the front page. Anyway. But that's the only scope of or the only impact of storage that you're analyzing in this report or this process.
There's a pigeonhole sort of like it's only for load management.
Right, but yeah, is that?
So no, I think that was probably shorthand for a summary here. I think what we would like to analyze is the impact of storage, not just for managing load, but it's really just to better match the supply and the demand. So it's on both the generation side and the load side. And then there's other load management tools as well that I think that's where the term load management comes in. It encompasses storage, but it's not only storage.
Right.
And so I would see storage as you know, the potential for if it's a solar plus storage, for example, like how does that change the equation?
Sure.
And so
I bring it up just to say that, you know, I was looking for like, where does storage fit in this? And that was the only place I saw it, unless I'm mistaken.
I think it is somewhere later on, but I need to,
Okay.
I'm guessing it's also part of resilience, right?
yes, I'm looking for this
Well,
this spot where
it's-
it's explicitly called out. and
There's a
it says-
place where it says, we're optimizing the timing of generation through time shifting or generation resources or load through energy storage or other load management measures. Maybe that's it. Sorry, I'm on,
Yes, where are you reading?
I am under the scenarios for analysis under considerations, the end of the second paragraph.
Right,
It's just the very end.
right. So time shifting of generation resources or load through energy storage or other, I think that is a consideration. And as we talked about before, that could, you know, maybe it needs to be framed more clearly to be both. And, you know, does that raise to be a, you know, a full-on scenario, or is that something that can be applied to each of the scenarios? I think we want to address it, but
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
The list of things to look into is, I'd say, close to daunting. There's a wide scope, but it's really helpful to walk through and just have a better idea. And thanks, I know this is a work in progress on your side, so we're not criticizing or picking anything apart by going through it. I don't want to sit down and read between today and tomorrow, and I go through it again. But with that, I'd like to get to Mr. Sterling as well, because he's also been part of our conversations in terms of articulating other questions or things that we might want to look at, as well as committee members. So anything else for Mr. Poor at the moment? All right. So thanks for coming in and sharing the work in progress. And let's go to Mr. Sterling. And I know that we have. You have a PowerPoint.
sure do.
Super spiffy. We also have, and I asked Ms. Newman to make copies. We have the matrix you put together. So thanks for doing a little, chipping in a little homework on behalf of the committee.
Sure.
So just to make sure that everyone has copies of that. So then it can be posted to our website as well, so that anyone else who's viewing can pull it down.
Peter Sterling, Renewable Energy Vermont. And just to be clear, that matrix doesn't include what TJ just gave you.
Okay.
All right. So, all right. So you have my thing, my PowerPoint in front of you. I'd like to start with what I always try to start with, which is why we need to do this. Every kilowatt hour of electricity generated by new renewables in Vermont reduces electricity generation from fossil fuel plants somewhere else in the world. I really feel like that's the reason we need to be here talking about this. We put new renewables online, whether it's here in Vermont or somewhere else in New England, somewhere else, not in Vermont, less fossil fuels are being burned, and that's the goal. So specifically, I just want to go through a few comments on 23-0107 version 7.1. There were three. This is what the committee talked about 2 weeks ago. We see three main problems with it. Moving to a tier 1 mandate without changing the underlying problems of unbundled RECs, remote hydro, and lack of additionality in our current tier 1 in the res isn't progress on fighting global warming. A study alone is insufficient to tackle this problem. We feel there needs to be a deeper dive through some kind of working group that will really dig into the utility specific solutions that are probably needed. And again, as I've said, we feel that the legislature must act as the lead on any analysis that's undertaken. We believe JFO is fully capable of that. So let me just go into a couple of reasons why Senator Bray, your proposal to move to a tier 1 mandate without changing other parts of the res is a problem.
Yeah, can I jump in? So I think.
You're the chair.
Well, thank you. Based on conversations, this is a ongoing dialogue about this. My sense is that where I'm aiming, and I'm not sure the committee needs to decide, but my sense is that we wouldn't be establishing any new mandates for the tiers in this. We would just step away from that and say, let's gather the data.
Okay.
And then once we have that data, whether it's the JFO study, the department study, put together an integrated picture, and then we'll have a better foundation to make decisions across the board, whether it's tier 1, 2, 1A, standard offer, PPAs, you name it.
Okay, so that takes down the anxiety level a whole ton.
All right.
So just to be clear, what's in 7.1 that moves to 100% tier 1 and then studies all these other parts is now off the table.
In my mind, yes.
Okay,
So, I mean, the committee, I don't know, other people have other opinions, but
okay, well then, we can skip over that. There were some other parts of 7.1 that were concerning. Then, we felt the study should analyze 20% in-state renewables by 2030 and not 2032, as the bill recommends. We also don't think it's realistic to study 30% in-state renewables by 2032, as 7.1 proposed, because of the condition of the grid. 2035 for that goal would be much more realistic. And I just want to say, in the strongest possible way, speaking for my allies in the environmental community, we fully believe that Vermont's res needs to stay a renewable energy mandate. There is no need to greenwash it further by bringing in a new definition such as clean or carbon-free. That just lets us greenwash nuclear power, which I understand there's a role for, but there's no need to call it, to put it on the same plane as other renewable resources like wind and solar. I also think for 7.1, we think the work you did to pull together S140, the energy storage stakeholder study, was great work, and would love to see language that really looks into energy storage in a detailed way, including procurement goals or things like that. Would really do a lot of good. One of the
just test a little on that one.
Uh-oh.
If we're sort of stepping away from naming goals and saying we're aiming to gather better information, so next January we have a deeper knowledge across the board, all technologies, all strategies. I'm trying to understand why we would contemplate right now naming storage goals.
So when Vermont did its res, at least from my business members I've heard, is when you put a goal or mandate in place, that sends a signal to the market that it's time to start investing in Vermont, right? We know Vermont had to get to 10% in state renewables, so folks started investing here to help Vermont get to that goal. Matt Murphy, when he was on, I think a couple of weeks ago, from Green Factor, who has about $100 million invested in Vermont, he said what I think most of my members would say, or most of the folks I've talked to in the energy storage sector, like Core and DeLorean and WEG, they would say it when there's a goal or some kind of signal from the state that this has to be met, folks will want to invest. And until there's that kind of goal, it's a lot less, it's just a lot less friendly a place to invest in, because you're not sure that it has to actually happen, right? You may want to spend all the time and money developing projects here, but you know what's going to happen. But like with standard offer, once you put it out there, people start coming in and trying to fill that up.
Sure.
So, we can talk about what the goal is and maybe it doesn't work out, but if you're asking why we should be discussing whether there should be a procurement goal for energy storage, I think
not
it's
so much
endless.
why. I mean, I get the reason.
Yeah,
It's
okay.
incentivizing clarity of the market, signal, all that kind of stuff helps make investment. What I'm wondering about is why we would, looking into whether or not we would name goals seems helpful to me. Naming goals at this point seems premature.
Yeah, I wouldn't say you'd want to come up with a number in your, I would say,
Okay.
should we look into whether an energy storage mandate makes sense in Vermont? And that would be the way I would say, you don't want to make a number or anything like that. Yeah, you don't want to presuppose the end there. Skipping to, this is the fastest testimony I've ever done, skipping to my last slide. This came up last in the previous testimony about some of the benefits of net metering. You know, Senator Brent, you had proposed in 7.1 to really change how net metering would be done. And Senator White, I know had a couple questions. If you could go to this last slide, I have this little chart from Dunsky there.
Yeah.
So this little chart, the state of New Hampshire, their version of DPS contracted with this consulting firm Dunsky to come up with a value stack on the benefits of distributed generations, particularly smaller net metering. They came up with this large value stack of all the benefits of net metering, and that was something we've never done in Vermont. When Vermont has done something close to this, and I know is through 5.100, the net metering rulemaking. They've looked at just 4 of the points on this chart: the RPS, the cost, the capacity, transmission charges, and energies, but never fully looked at all the other things that obviously New Hampshire's energy office decided to look at. So when we say from the development community, what could our Department of Public Service do better? I would say looking at all the values, including the social cost of carbon, which Dunsky here puts in at 5 cents per kilowatt hour. That's one example of something that we would like to see done that has not been done in Vermont, that our department hasn't done. And again, to answer the questions that came up last week in this committee about what are the values of net metering that Senator White had and some others, this to me is the example that we would want to see. That now our numbers obviously in Vermont would be somewhat different because we have different solar levels of solar penetration, things like that. But still, we'd love to see these numbers.
Yeah, no, great. I mean, so one quick clarification. You were talking about social cost of carbon. Is that
environmental?
Here is environmental.
Yeah, that's environmental. So,
and which they slot in at 5 cents kilowatt. Whatever. Yeah, we're talking about dollars. Great. And so thanks for bringing that. This has been sort of a holy grail on renewable energy generation. I'm delighted to see this kind of value stack because we've talked about it, but we haven't had it.
Yeah.
And so we've had competing narratives about the value of net metering, for instance, and it's left everyone in kind of a data poor, frustrating position. So it's great to see this.
I have one more piece of information I'd like to share that is just tangentially related to why we need to move forward on res reform. Certainly, many people I've talked to have said, well, why don't we just get more power from Hydro-Quebec? It's relatively cheap, it runs all the time and all that. And I'm not saying we shouldn't keep our power with Hydro-Quebec. That's what I'm saying, but there was an article in Bloomberg News that came out last week, interview with Hydro-Quebec and others up there, that they actually don't have enough power currently to meet their projected need if they want to go carbon free, and that if more power is needed, it's going to require flooding more land up there, which raises a lot of questions about whether Vermont wants to play a role in more of Quebec being flooded by asking for more power from them. And I have the article here if anyone wants it, but I want us to, when we talk about why we need to take more control over where our power is coming from, which is essentially the heart of why we should do res reform, we cannot just say anymore, the power is going to come from somewhere else miraculously, right? We don't know if all the offshore wind off the coast of New England is going to ever get to us. The 1,000 megawatts of new wind in Aroostook County in Maine is already spoken for. There is no magic source of new renewables or even existing renewables that we can potentially tap into as load grows. So the question really is, how do we take control of that? And I think updating our res and putting in new higher targets or mandates is the way to go.
Thanks. Can you send the Bloomberg article to the committee?
I will.
You already have.
I have already, but I'd love to send it again.
Okay, thanks. Belt and suspenders. Senator Watson.
I have a question about time. Like, I don't know if we're trying to save enough time to have a discussion, because I have a question.
Sure. I mean, I figure this is kind of a loose conversation, editing session, or like asking questions, trying to get ready to come back to this tomorrow, I think, and sharpen it up a little bit.
So I apologize for being a little bit dense here, but
You're a physics teacher, I doubt you're.
Well, I could use one more time an explanation of this graph.
Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, sorry to be, I
It's
just
not
need.
bad. No, it's fine.
Yeah.
So this graph looks at all the ways that net metering in New Hampshire would, basically all the money it saves is the long story short, right? So the bottom, I only have a black and white one. So like that bottom, the energy one, that's how much you save when you don't have to purchase energy, right? Because someone made the energy behind the meter. The transmission charges, that's how much it saves for if that person who had net metered, otherwise that power would have had transmission through the system, that's how much the utilities would have had to pay to ship it through. And then it goes, I can't name every single one of these
those
values.
are,
I can get you all of those, but when you add up this value stack, it looks at, but there's in New Hampshire, they're saying for that first column in 2021, net metering actually saved consumers 17 cents, a cumulative value of 17 cents. So if the net metering program paying 16 cents, that means it was actually a savings, right? Because we talk about this cost shift, or how much, why are we paying more money to have people net meter? This shows you in New Hampshire, and I don't know what they're paying in their program. It's coming at 17 cents, which does not include the 5 cents, which of taking carbon out of the air, because when net metering is running at this level, I guess it's taking a certain amount of carbon out of the air, right? So you could almost say it's 22 cents. So for example, when Efficiency Vermont's programs are evaluated by the department, it does include that social cost of carbon and environmental benefit in evaluating Efficiency Vermont's programs. That's entirely appropriate. However, that is not done when evaluating net metering's efficacy. We do not include a social cost of carbon or any kind of environmental attribute for not, when we do net metering. And that's a decision the department's made, and is what it is. But, we certainly would like to see it evaluated in a different way, so we understand the full benefits as well as the costs of net metering. And I don't mean to make the res, and let's just be super clear, the res is not about net metering, right? That's just one piece of the whole thing. So I don't want to go down that road, but this is an example of the kind of data we were always hoping to get. We have not gotten as any up on how our procurement programs work.
Well, and so this is very interesting, and I imagine that this graph might, if we were to do this for Vermont, it might look different for different distribution.
Definitely do that.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so I am assuming that this kind of graph is, well, maybe I shouldn't assume. If I can ask Mr. Poor.
Yeah.
So this kind of graph I would love for this kind of graph to be generated for Vermont. I imagine that this is not necessarily envisioned by the study you're doing, but it could be, but I'm not sure. But any comments on this kind of graph?
And so in the study, we talk about looking at the analysis from a societal perspective and Vermont perspective.
Yeah.
That societal perspective would include the value associated with emissions. The department was the first ones to actually request that the social cost of carbon be used for efficiency. And we led the process actually to get it to be used in the Climate Council analysis. When we also, for efficiency, look at the Vermont ratepayer, as one of their minimum requirements is that costs to the electric sector are exceeded by the benefits for efficiency. And so there's that test and the societal test for efficiency, which includes emissions. And I think that's appropriate to look at both. And that is incorporated or intended to be. If it's not explicit, I'm happy to change it because it is intended to be incorporated here. In order to understand the impacts of these different scenarios, the value of distributed generation necessarily has to be considered, right? And so it should be it should be doable for a consultant to carve that out and say here are the different values. And so that was a really long way of saying yes, we would like to see that in the study.
And broken out by distribution utility or region, perhaps?
Maybe.
Just knowing that
Yeah.
this profile's gonna look different
Right, that's absolutely right. I think I want to be careful with what I can commit to for all the
Yeah,
different scenarios for a limited budget. So definitely statewide, and then the ability to modify those assumptions in the workbook to put in utility-specific assumptions at a minimum, if not doing it for every utility.
So there's a section that in your scope of work that talked about various types of generation. So net metering you're planning in the contract you let drill into net metering value stack, or is
Well, distributed sorry.
so I'm trying to figure out if you're already covering this, or we would need to ask you to cover it, or it might become part of the JFO work. I was trying to find a home for it.
So distributed generations value stack. So solar from net metering and solar from a different resource, they may have different costs, and they may have a slightly different shape and profile. But I think we would generally say, here's a value stack from net metering. If that different profile is vastly different, we may call out different sizes of distributed generation. But it would be
150 versus 5 megawatts is probably going to have.
right. That will have a different shape for sure, or rooftop, and to really understand the differences there. But the value of a megawatt hour generated in at a certain time is going to be the same, right? So you can, as long as you have that load shape, you should be able to cover it.
Well, on this Senator Watson's other point about 5DU, I'm imagining, I'm trained by Ms. Cohen to always think of VEC as having a different profile than GMP, than WEC. So it would be helpful to know how it lands for different DUs. Okay, great, thank you. Back to you, Senator Watson.
Well, thank you. I guess I'm thinking about, JFO, doing this work, and, how, the scope of what is imagined by the DPS study, and just the value that JFO might bring to this as well. So anyway, just circling back to that. Yeah.
So, we understand that JFO doesn't have the expertise on their staff. They would hire a Dunsky-like entity to produce this information that the legislature is requesting.
Yeah.
So there is no scribe back in the back room of JFO going through the spreadsheet.
Right. Yeah.
When they have that, right, JFO has a lot of expertise. They do amazing work on healthcare, but they even still hire out people. They have healthcare experts on staff. But in this case, they would clearly have to get someone to run this for them and to make sure, we got accurate, information that was.
Well, and my interest also is that this work is done somewhere.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, we all agree that we should really win if we can move forward on the merits of this. We want information that we feel is reliable. If the numbers come back that this is too costly, that we cannot increase our amount of in-state DG, we should just be throwing it out there. So be it. But, I think, to date, we've not had, this Dunsky value stack is just one example of the kind of full picture of information that we feel we need to move forward to make this decision, right? I mean, I can give you more examples of where, we felt like we've not been heard in the department's analysis, and so that's not going to belabor that, but let's just get the information that's there. Let's have the conversation. If we can move forward, we should, and if we can't, so be it.
Sorry, can you send us the link or something to the Dunsky report so we can figure out what distribution, OPEX, and DRIPE, and all these other things are? That would be great. The other thing is, you didn't want to belabor other things where you felt like the analysis that was being done and
I can
bring the
belabor.
nuance through the questions that you felt would be more
Yeah.
helpful for everyone to see.
Okay,
But
so I can be, it's in the first bullet point.
to get those things on there.
It's in the first bullet point of my power of the last slide here.
Yeah.
In the past, when Rev has submitted comments on the new net meter rulemaking process or biennial updates or the consolidated res model, we feel that they failed to quantify the benefits of distributed generation, such as reduced line losses, avoided or deferred investments in distribution infrastructure, the co-benefits for societal electrification efforts of our system, and from the upgrades paid for by renewable project owners, and the benefits distributed to other programs. So those are just a couple examples. And then, as I mentioned, the failure to consider the social cost of carbon and other societal benefits of distributed generation. So those first two bullet points on my last page there, the examples.
All right, well, so thanks, let's have you stay in the chair, and do you have any other committee questions? Senator White?
Thank you, Chair Bray. So I asked the question to Mr. Ford about kind of the trust and the back and forth relationship. And
Yeah.
I really respect what you're saying around JFO needing to be lead on this possible report.
Okay.
I'm wondering but I also am empathetic to the idea that they could do a section of it rather than the whole shebang. And I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit to what would build trust in the stakeholder process to help you feel like, A, the things that your developers and the folks that you represent are saying are flaws in previous processes get resolved, and how do we actually properly move forward?
So I guess, I feel like I have a really good working relationship with Mr. Ford.
Yeah.
And the other people on his staff, I think, are wonderful, and they're very easy to talk to, and that's not the problem. I think,
Okay.
I'll just be blunt, I think the leadership of the department sometimes, it doesn't, it's not a two-way street. Commissioner Cheney was in the newspaper in the 7 days cover story 2 weeks ago saying, we have enough solar.
Yeah.
For all intents and purposes, she said, what we have now is totally appropriate. We don't need more. And that's fair. She's allowed to have that opinion. But when we talk about moving forward on a conversation or a process, what should the future look like? And the commissioner saying, well, we don't need any more. It's hard to really see that the thumb isn't on the scale at some level.
Are there any things that we could put in place in this process that would help alleviate that, I think, reasonable concern?
Yeah. Having written polls in the past for folks, we can write a poll that would get a result we want, like an electoral poll, or if I want to show that the bottle bill is the most popular law in the state, I could write a poll that's showing it's terrible or great, right? It all depends. A model is only good as what you put into it and how you put things into it. And I'll be honest, right? Like, we can all do that. And I think, I haven't read what TJ's written, and I'm sure it's fine, but if you were to put certain things in and because you wanted an outcome, like Commissioner Tierney said, we don't need more solar, it would be easy to look like you did a really good job. And I'm not saying they're going to do it. It's just hard to see because it would be very technical to dive back into that. And that's why I guess I've always felt like if the legislature was in control, the legislature hired a consultant, they would be able to make those behind the curtain decisions that are really important in any model that you do, whether it's the REMI model or writing a poll or anything like that. I'm not saying anyone's dishonest. I'm really not. I'm just saying, for me, the confidence would come from knowing that the legislature was in control of its own process.
Okay.
Well, I appreciate Senator White, you're asking a somewhat blunt question, but we need to be forthcoming if we're going to get something meaningful done, as opposed to having sort of a polite conversation that leaves everything kind of as it was. And we all would like to me, there's a shared sensibility in the room. We'd like to do better. And as you said, let the chips fall where they may.
Sure.
And I am not imagining any particular outcome.
Yeah.
Where we'll be next January. So.
And can I just say one last thing before I go about the confidence piece?
Sure.
What would give me the most confidence that we can all be, if this governor hasn't vetoed every single piece of climate legislation that the legislature has sent him, including the Global Warming Solutions Act, right, which really did nothing but set up a process and how we were gonna figure out how to reduce our goal, our greenhouse gas emissions. That would give me the most confidence. We have a governor that I think has been clear in his opposition to the kind of climate reforms that the Senate, the majority of the Senate, the majority of the House want. And that is hard for me to believe the governor and his leadership team want to get to the same place you all do, and that the information we would get out of his administration would be the same thing you all would get if you looked into it your way.
Well, and it strikes me that one of the ways to help everyone, regardless of where they are sort of politically, is just to make sure that we have as much transparency as possible, so that you know, the assumptions that most of us may not have heard discussed or seen laid out, made explicit, are made explicit, so we can. The legislature is the least expert party in this, and yet we're in a decision-making position. So I think I'm just trying to help us all learn together, so that by the time January comes around, we feel like, okay, we've gathered better, genuinely better information, without a thumb on the scale, without the whole thing, even if there's, it's fine for an administration to have a point of view. We actually expect them to, so it's fine for everyone in the committee to have a point of view. All right, so with you still there, we have this document. And you said it hasn't been updated since Mr. Core went through with the scenario. And I know that we're revving things, so things get out of sync by addition. But maybe if we, without getting sort of bogged down by details that have changed in the current proposal from Mr. Core, are there things you could just go through us and highlight as you feel like at this point the department study isn't going to cover this, so you all, in working with JFO, may want to cover that. And if people want to look at this overnight, we can come back at it. We will come back to it tomorrow.
I would say generally what I'm hearing TJ talk about sounds like fantastic stuff.
Okay.
Like in general, I just haven't read it. The earlier iteration of what he gave you had a lot of good things in it.
Yeah.
There were things I would change, but in general, it was moving in a solid direction. Again, it's all about what assumptions are going into it and how it actually gets, comes out of the sausage making machine. So I don't know if I could really
You don't know
comment.
what you're referring to when you say sausage making machine. That's another committee. We don't have. All right. Well, if you could, I'm feeling like for myself and maybe other members of the committee, now we have Mr. Core's document with this. If you might, and we have your PowerPoint, if you might consider revisiting this and tuning it, bringing it up to date, that would be helpful. And it's not your job, but it's helpful to us.
I'll try to do as fairly as I can. It's public, so if anyone thinks it's wrong, that's fine. But yeah, we'll go over what TJ presented this morning. We can do that this afternoon and get you a revised matrix with an update. That's no problem.
Because we'll come back to it tomorrow, and I'm hoping that tomorrow we'll get way closer to pulling together, clarifying anything that we think would benefit from being more clearly specified in what the department's doing. And then if we're going to do something through JFO, which I think we're inclined to do, that we then also are explicit and enumerate what we want for that study, so that in the end we're looking at a fair, balanced, and comprehensive set of
Isn't fair and balanced Fox News?
I don't listen, so I don't know.
Okay, good.
I don't have a television, so I'm a little behind the times.
All right. Well, thank you very much for
My
your
old black and white said it's only 2 to Twilight Zone. So. Okay, thank you. So, Mr. Porter, do you want to rejoin us at the table, because there's been a bit of back and forth. You want to make sure that you feel like the department gets a chance to discuss its take.
Sure.
There's some concerns have been expressed, so I just want to make sure that you feel like you have a chance to speak to them. We're not trying to debate here, but I want to make sure everyone feels like they're heard.
Yeah, I guess I will comment on the question that Senator White asked both witnesses today.
I tried to be fair.
Yeah, thank you. And I just, over the last like 5 years, there's been different proposals and different statements made, both publicly and privately. And I feel like I need to communicate that the trust is a two-way street, right? And there's been instances where that the department has felt the same way that I presume the red members feel like. So I just, and so I think we're in an opportunity that we're looking at this fresh and we can go forward. My take and understanding of the commissioner's comments that were in the press were related to the pace of solar consistent with current state energy policy, and that includes the renewable energy standard. And so, I think there is, I said this the other day, I think there's I don't know if it's a predilection of human nature or just a desire to make this seem like that there's polar opposites positions going on here. And I really don't think that's the case in this instance. And I think there is a lot of room where we can go forward, and I'm not under the illusion that we're going to agree with everything, that everybody's going to be, holding hands and singing songs together. But I do think that there's room for kind of shared understanding and really honest debate over the issues going forward. And I hope that can happen. I think that I think we all need to work hard to be careful with our language and not use inflammatory words that really can be the wrong way. I think be taken the wrong way, and to kind of play that out in not only in this committee room, but publicly speaking in the Public Utility Commission room where everybody's under oath there. So hopefully everybody's saying what they mean. And so I guess I just think there's room for progressing here in a shared way. And we may depart come November or whenever this process ends, but that's okay. And if we were all kind of on the same page the whole way, we might not be doing Vermonters justice by thinking about things how they also, I think I with the consideration, a lot in the net metering rulemaking, there's a lot of instances where we've been, the department's perspective has been, well, we have the current renewable energy policy that requires this much. We can serve that by either one resource or another. And in that instance, those are the resources we're comparing with each other, net metering versus a larger solar project. And so in that instance, you're not changing really the carbon benefit, right? If it's both solar, they have the same carbon impact. And so then you're really just looking at some of the other issues. And so I just want to be clear on like kind of what some of the disagreements have been in the past, and that they're not always over climate. I think this is a different issue when we're talking about not how do we meet the current renewable energy standard, it's how do we best look at the pace going forward for our renewable energy standard, and how is that structured with procurement programs to best balance energy policy. And so this is a different conversation, and I hope that we can hope we can just move forward.
I think, one thing that's become more clear in the last year, I think, is the equity aspects too, the passage of the EJ bill. Trying to make sure that we provide opportunities for every Vermonter to participate as opposed to having it be so income-based at the moment. Okay, great. Well, thank you very much to everyone, to Mr. Ford, Mr. Sterling, everyone in the room. So we all have some homework to do between now and tomorrow. But my goal is to come back and sharpen the proposal and put us in a place by the end of the week for sure to be able to say what we would do via a JFO study versus what would be, maybe we can make suggestions that also get implemented through your work as you're defining the scope of work and the details there. All right, so thank you for the civil and helpful conversation. It's always good